So I am just the short intro hype man for our illustrious guest we have here virtually. First of all, thank you very much for having us and for the opportunity to feature Dr. Lawrence Yun, who is the Chief Economist for the National Association of Realtors. So I'm just going to give, Connor Miller, Government Affairs Director. I'm going to give a quick introduction to our great speaker, and then I'm going to turn it away to Dr. Yun. So it is my honor to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Lawrence Yun. Dr. Yun is the Chief Economist and oversees the research group at the National Association of Realtors. If you are not familiar with his work, he supervises and is responsible for a wide range of research activity for the National Association, including NAR's existing home sales statistics, Affordability Index, and the Home Buyers and Sellers Profile Report. Dr. Yun creates NAR's forecasts and participates in many economic forecasting panels, among them the Blue Chip Council and the Wall Street Journal Forecasting Survey. He appears regularly on financial news outlets and is a frequent speaker at real estate conferences throughout the United States. Dr. Yun received his undergraduate degree from Purdue University, boiler up, and earned his PhD from the University of Maryland, go Terps, all right, at College Park. So today, Dr. Yun will be sharing with us the current state of the real estate market and a forecast of its future heading into 2023. So without any further ado, take it away, Dr. Lawrence Yun.
Thank you, Connor, for the introduction and arranging for me to come virtually. I wish I was there in person. Actually, I was there in that room many years ago. Was it 5 years ago, 6 years ago? But certainly enjoy visiting Traverse City. I think any Americans would enjoy visiting Traverse City. What a beautiful location. In the summer, of course, or even in autumn, good condition. I also went by Traverse City a few times because I had to go to the Mackinac Island because there was a Michigan Realtors event there, and what a unique location in Mackinac Island. But thank you again for inviting me. And of course, everyone is looking at what's going to happen to the housing market, becoming a major economic news. How is the housing recent downturn? Is it going to pull the broader economy down? And then we have the situation of Europe, where it's almost guaranteed that Europe will go into a recession. They don't have enough energy. Without that energy, it means that some of the factory production in, say, Germany, they may have to do some rolling blackout during the winter months, cutting back on some production. Less income in Europe means less purchases of US products, which also has a linkage and therefore hurt somewhat into the US economy. So with all this in the background, I will try to give you my assessment of what you should expect related to the economy and particularly related to the real estate market. So I am going to put the PowerPoint slide onto the screen. What a magnificent technology. You know, this Zoom technology existed pre-COVID, but we were forced to use it during COVID. And now because of it, we can now begin to travel virtually. I am currently at home in Arlington, Virginia. The office will be in Washington, D.C., just a few blocks from the U.S. Capitol. But right now, the D.C. is fairly empty. It's not only about the midterm elections, large, important contests across the country, but people are not returning to Washington. Many federal employees are still working from home. They have that permission. So the whole city appears fairly empty. So when I go to office, it's fairly easy drive in, less traffic. And I feel sorry for those downtown restaurants or those people who sell sandwiches, just not at that many people in Washington. So let me put the PowerPoint slide onto the screen. All right, so let's first start from the mortgage rates, because especially people who are in the market constantly looking at the mortgage rate as to what would happen. People who are not in the market, they're not concerned with mortgage rates because they locked in at 3% rate or refinance it to 3% rate, or I should say many people in Traverse City, I think good number, possibly 1/3 or 1/2 have already paid off their mortgages. So mortgage rate is not a factor, but for people who are entering the market, who wants to buy and sell today, mortgage rate is critical and it is popping higher, based on one data point, 20-year high, based on another data point, 15-year high. It is the highest in many years. And the question is, when will it stop rising? This is a graph from 1990 onward. So from 1990 onward, you can see the general trend of downward sloping mortgage rates. Declining somewhat, little fluctuation, declining, fluctuation, declining, but the overall declining trend until this year. So from beginning of this year, you see the rapid increase. So the first question becomes, why was the mortgage rate overall declining over this period from 1990 right before this year? And the answer is, inflation was not an issue, consumer price inflation. So if the inflation is not an issue, a lender feels comfortable that the money they lend, and when the money is returned back, has held value. It has purchasing power. So they can charge modest mortgage rates, modest interest rates, knowing they can still make profit. But the inflation is high, well, you will be crazy to lend at low interest rate. You lend at a certain rate, you get the money back, but it has lost purchasing power, so it doesn't make any sense. So you can say that higher mortgage rate today is due to this high consumer price inflation that Americans are extremely frustrated about. So high inflation leading to higher mortgage rates. Of course, there are some connected dot actions like Federal Reserve raising interest rates, the US Treasury yield responding. So there's all these connected dot points, but in essence, high inflation is leading to this high mortgage rate condition. One can even think about it over in Britain. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, or she is out now, and part of the reason is mortgage rates spiked up, or interest rates spiked up during her brief period, and consequently, and inflation rate is running very, very high in Britain. So that also led to the consequential outcome, a political outcome, because people do not like high inflation, do not like high mortgage rates. I put that little 3 red bar to indicate something called resistance point. Now, people who are in the finance or who do stocks and bond, or at least aware of stocks and bond trading, would be very familiar with the concept of resistance points. It's a technical analysis, meaning that it's sometimes not even related to economic factors. It is just the momentum. So we know that people always buy and sell stocks every day. But at a certain point, there is a massive selling or massive buying all at the same time due to the momentum factors. So the resistance point is like you hit the resistance point, like hitting a wall, and then you bounce back, and then you go the other way a bit. So I put 3 resistance points. So the first resistance point, just interest rate or the mortgage rate just blew by that. So as if there was a no resistance or no wall to stop it. Today, 7% mortgage rate is in essence at the second resistance point. So right now it's trying to battle it out. Buyers and sellers of bonds, mortgage-backed security, buying, selling to see whether this second resistance point would hold. If it holds, then mortgage rate may actually go back down again, modestly, maybe 6.5% condition. But if it does not hold, then it's gonna go to the next resistance point, which is essentially at 8.5%, something that we do not wanna see. Certainly the realtors do not want to see 8.5%. So critical point right now, testing the second resistance point. This is almost like an army battle, 2 armies fighting it out. But once the line is broken, the advancing army makes a huge gain, not a small gain, but a huge gain until the next resistance point. So it's almost like that. So right now, critical juncture, 7% mortgage rate, testing to see whether it holds or it breaks. One of the first things that I do every morning is look at the 10-year Treasury yields. Now, I'm speaking with the economics club, which means I'm sure that you are familiar with the economic textbook, and it shows that when US government runs up deficit, meaning spending more money than what they collect in tax revenue, they have to borrow money. And the interest rate they would pay, the government would pay, would be essentially the 10-year Treasury yield. I mean, there are different time frame, different duration, but you can think of it as 10-year Treasury. One thing to note is that mortgage rate, the red line, and the blue line, the 10-year Treasury, move almost similarly together, almost synchronized movement. There's some variation. Sometimes the gap could be a little larger than normal. And in fact, today it is a little larger than normal, but essentially it moves together. So if I want to know what's going to happen to mortgage rate today, I look at what's happening to the Treasury yield. And it's not pretty. It looks like the Treasury yield constantly is breaking higher, but the mortgage rate is sort of holding at 7, and let's see what happens, whether it breaks at that 7 or not. But why is the 10-year Treasury rising? Well, you can say inflation is rising. So naturally, again, the lenders want to be compensated for that loss in purchasing power. But another element is because just a couple of months ago, 10-year Treasury was actually about almost 100 basis point lower just a couple of months ago before the recent increase. So it could be that they're trying to reprocess this new inflation information, or during the day, 2 months ago, President Joe Biden made an announcement on the student debt relief. And I was speaking to the realtors, and I said, well, president is making a student debt relief forgiveness, $10,000 or $20,000 part. NAR has done a lot of looking at potential home buyers, younger generation, why they're not buying home, and student debt was a major barrier at that time. I said to the realtor audience during that day, don't think this is a free lunch. Of course, some millennial generation will benefit and maybe they could buy a home, possibly, but don't think it is a free lunch. It means a larger budget deficit, more borrowing, and possibly even higher interest rate, nudging up the interest rate as a result. So in Washington, I hope they understand the trade-offs. So based on the trade-offs, decide. Unfortunately, many people in Washington, they think there is really a free lunch. They think, okay, let's make some free lunch. And we know there is no free lunch. So part of this recent increase in mortgage rates, increase in Treasury yield, you can say it's just because budget deficit is rising even faster than before. Now, this is an economic impact of that student debt relief. There's also the question about fairness. What happens to those people who already paid off the student debt? Do they get any relief? The answer is no. What about those parents who actually pay the tuition? Do they get a relief? No. And then you ask the question, what about truck drivers? Do they get $20,000? No. What about those people working at nursing homes? No. People working at a hotel? No. So there's always that fairness issue associated with it. But the economic impact is that there is no free lunch. Some people who are relieved of that debt, maybe they could buy a home, but also the trade-off is slightly higher mortgage rates. I don't know about how much, but definitely directionally, it is a higher interest rate environment. Now, because of higher mortgage rates, we are seeing home sales coming down. This is a pending home sales, meaning contract signings to buy a home. Essentially, 90% of contract signings result in closings. 10% somehow there's a disagreement at stage and it breaks apart. But 90% leads to closings. And what you see on this chart is from early 2020, right before COVID. And all the data are seasonally adjusted to account for stronger spring season and weaker winter season in terms of home sales. So the data is adjusted. So what you are seeing is that in the early months, sales collapsed. We were stuck at home. But once we were let out to say, okay, now you can go out and about, the home sales began to rise, and go above pre-pandemic levels. because people were witnessing once in a lifetime low mortgage rates of 3%. People took advantage of that. So for almost 2 years, home sales were above pre-pandemic until this year. From this year, it is sinking, continue to sink because mortgage rate is rising, and continue to rise. So home sales moving in opposite direction of mortgage rate, and this is the case. Just to give you a numerical example, just consider, say, young couple. They are saying, well, okay, we are tired of renting, we want to buy a home. And say their monthly payment that can really handle is $1,200 in mortgage, $1,200, something reasonable. 1 year ago, they could get a $300,000 mortgage, $300,000 mortgage to buy. Today, that same individual with the same income, but at different mortgage rates, the loan amount is not $300,000, but it is $190,000, which means they have to look at different neighborhood. And some people say, nope, I don't want to even look at different neighborhood. I'd rather be a renter. Or some people simply say, there's not enough inventory at the low end. So this is a major change. Again, $300,000 mortgage last year versus for the same income, only getting $190,000 mortgage. And that is why the contract signing to buy a home is falling. And here's the data from our Aspire North Association of Realtors, looking at the Traverse City region. So year to date, the unit sales are down 11.8%, which is actually better performance compared to rest of the country. Rest of the country is down about, year to date will be about 15%. Current data is showing on a month-to-month, almost 20-30% decline, say September versus September of last year. So you are actually holding on a little better. Median price, $399,000, which is a gain of 9.7% from 1 year ago. So this is your local market condition. You want to know more data, contact Connor, and then I'm sure they have more data to share. Or contact realtors. They can actually dive into local neighborhood data. This is the price trend in the US from year 2000. So the first little hump that you see at the beginning of the chart, more towards the beginning of the chart, that is the artificial price increase. Well, we can say artificial in hindsight because everything is a clear vision in hindsight. And there was a massive, funny, risky mortgages back then. Subprime lending, teaser rate mortgages that bloomed up quickly. So these risky mortgages simply imploded, leading to foreclosure crisis, and the prices went down. And once prices began to settle down, it made a long run, and then an almost hyperbolic increase in the past 2 years in terms of prices. So one question that is being raised is this a second real estate bubble? Because home prices certainly cannot continue to rise at this level. And rather than say it's a bubble or not, understand the difference. Difference is people who took out a mortgage in recent years, they had to meet a strict underwriting standards. They have to demonstrate income, they have to stay within their budget, they have to demonstrate the ability to repay standard. If people cannot meet those standards, they cannot get a mortgage. So right away, you see the big difference between the bubble crash of 2007-8 period versus today sound mortgages. In fact, the homeowners today, they're all smiling. If you paid off your mortgage, you are seeing price gains. If you still have the mortgage, I'm sure you refinance into that 3% rate and you say, Yahoo, I'm so happy I have that 3% mortgage rate. But you had to show all that documentation to get that 3%. So homeowners are in a fine shape and not a risky condition like more than a decade ago. Here's another chart to say why home prices cannot crash. This is the number of homes on the market, inventory, supply. The hump that you see, again, towards the middle of the graph, in fact, that is the housing crisis. The inventory condition at that time versus today, it would be 4 times more inventory back then. So we are really tight on inventory. I put that blue line as a year 2000 sort of arbitrary reference line, but year 2000 was considered very normal. And we are running even lower inventory compared to year 2000. Furthermore, we have a more population in America, more population, yet inventory levels are low. And it's very interesting. We have fewer buyers today because of higher mortgage rates. But what is even more frustrating for the realtors who are in the business is that if there are even fewer listings, new listings are not popping out. And why is it not popping out? Because just consider a homeowner. As long as they have the job, and they have, say, additional child in the family, using this as an example, and they say, well, we need to get a different home with an extra bedroom. We have an additional child in the family. And then they say, well, do we like 3% mortgage rates or do we like that extra bedroom? And they do the math and they say, nope, we like the 3% mortgage rate more than the extra bedroom. So many people are saying they will stay put, even though the house they're currently living in may not be ideal. They love their 3% mortgage rate, and hence the new listings are not popping out. For people who are not in the market, what does this mean? It means that prices cannot crash. Again, first, we don't have those risky mortgages. And second, we don't have enough supply. Simple economics, supply and demand, not enough supply, prices cannot crash. I will say that California may see a 10% price decline next year because high price markets are always more vulnerable to mortgage rate changes. It's a huge monthly payment differences from changes in mortgage rate when the home prices are very high. So California is vulnerable. Furthermore, you are seeing outflow of people from California going to other states. So when you are seeing a lot of people exiting California, well, that's not a good condition for real estate. So California probably will see about 10% price decline next year. In Traverse City, I think it's gonna be very, very stable. -5 is possible, but +5 is also possible. So I don't know which way it would go, -5 or +5, but it's not going to be -30, nor is it going to be +30 in Traverse City. So it's going to be a much more stable range next year. Now, this is another indication why we should not expect price crash. The number of homes that are being sold as foreclosures or short sales, historically low. So again, housing market is on very solid foundation. Let me see if I should run these numbers for this audience. Let me just do it quickly, because some of you may be on the market. So currently, 51% of the homes are being sold at or above list price, implying that there is still multiple offers. Buyers retreated, but since there is not enough inventory, when that new inventory shows up in a neighborhood, desirable neighborhood, they draw 2 or 3 buyers because of lack of inventory. So the buyer pool has shrunk, but there are still some buyers still sniffing around, looking for that new listing. But since there are not that many new listings, when the listings come, there could be multiple offers. Consequently, 51% of the homes are sold at or above list price. But 49% of the homes are doing some price concessions, and it's related to the days on the market. So whether you are in a position to sell or whether you are in a position to buy, maybe you will take these numbers into consideration. So let's go to the very last column, 4.6, 5.2, and down the line, very last column. So what does this imply? So if the home found a buyer within the first week, contract signing within the first week, through price negotiation, is a 4.6% price discount. In fact, this used to be very normal, pre-COVID. You list a home, you never expected to get the list price, so you know there will be some price negotiation. But if the home was on the market for 30 days, then the price concession is 6.8%. But if the home was on the market for 120 days, the price concession is 14.9%. This data is from the multiple listing service across the country, most multiple listing service. So we check the homes that close, how did the list price change and by how much based on days on the market. So this is the data that is occurring in recent months. So longer the days on the market, larger price decline. It's very logical. What you may not have known is the actual figure. So for example, 120 days, in order to sell it at 120 days, on average, 14.9%. I mean, that's a deep discount. Just consider a $1 million home, you are selling at $850,000 if it's not staying on the market for that long period. The housing supply in the meantime is still inadequate. So this is the housing starts across the country. So look at the early part of the graph, which is sort of before the housing market crash, there was overproduction. Then from the low point in 2010, it's been trying to pick up, but it never really got back to normal. So I thought maybe this year it would get up to normal. And what do you know? Now the builders are cutting back on production. So we don't have any oversupply of homes coming onto the market. So you have homeowners who don't want to sell their home. They love their 3% mortgage rate. And then you have the home builders who are producing those empty homes, yet now they are cutting back on production. But the one area where the production is still happening is on the rental market. Rental vacancy rates are at historic low. Consequently, the rents are rising strongly because of the lack of rental units. Therefore, the builders are ramping up the construction of apartments. Seems like logical consequence. When you take a deep breath, you begin to reflect, is this the direction of America? Fewer ownership, but many more renters. So do we want to move the country into a renter society? I mean, is this the way we want to see? Of course, people are following their economic incentives, the logic, all this part, but this is what it looks like. We are slowly shifting away from ownership into producing more and more apartment for rental households. Let me now turn to the economy. We experienced 2 straight quarters of negative GDP. The new figure will be coming out soon. It could be somewhat positive. Some people say it may even be negative, but then it may turn negative after 2 more quarters. But at least the data that we are aware of, first quarter was negative, second quarter was negative. The beginning of the chart shows early 2020, economy shut down, nothing happening, big red. Then once the economy reopened, trying to catch up, big positive, and then it remained positive until early this year. Part of the negative is that housing is down. So when housing goes down, it's going to pull the economy down. But there are other factors pulling the economy down. It is mildly negative, not a major negative, mildly negative. So is it a recession or not? And the answer is, we don't know. Because there is a committee of 9 people behind closed doors who will vote as to whether we were in a recession about 6 months from now. So it's in 6 months, they will cast their vote. I don't like that process at all. Who determined this 9 people? For me, that's so subjective. I don't care how much of an expert they are or how much recognition these 9 people have. Why are we giving power to these 9 people? We should determine objectively, without subjectivity, without people's opinion, just say, let's just choose a number, whatever it is. And GDP may be a good candidate. So if GDP declined for 2 straight quarters, let's call it a recession. So maybe this is an objective way of doing it, but that's not how it's done. We have to wait for that vote among those people, and they will declare whether or not we were in a recession. You don't believe we are in a recession? Look at your retirement account. Now you will see, oh, something is not right about the economy. So when you look at your retirement account, definitely you have seen, good portion of the wealth simply evaporate, just gone, disappear. At the same time, we have one of the most bizarre economic recession of all time, if there is one, which is there's more job opening compared to people. Blue is help wanted sign, while the orange is people looking for job. If you are at home, sitting on a couch, playing video games all day long, you are not in the statistics. You have to be actively searching for job. And in America, somehow, compared to pre-COVID versus today, 3 million people who used to be in the labor force disappeared. I don't know where they went. Are they just sitting on the couch? Where did they go? So 3 million people disappeared. They're out of the statistics. But given that right now we have worker shortage, now of course, it does not mean finding a job is easy. Mortgage lender, they're laying off people. So if you are a mortgage broker, you lost your job, you will not take that job at 7-Eleven, simple. So trying to find that suitable job may take some time, but still it is quite remarkable that there's more job opening today compared to people searching for job conditions. This is total number of people receiving W-2 statement payroll jobs, so steady income. Realtors, they're not on W-2 statement. Their income fluctuates, sometimes goes up, sometimes goes down, commission-based income. But among those people with steady income, W-2 statement income, this is how many jobs in America. So early 2020, before COVID, then COVID hit, 20 million job losses. Now steady recovery. Now we are at a point we have more Americans working than ever before by modest amount. It took almost 2 years. But every year we should have a record because we are in a rising population condition, but we only recover. And here's a data that may be a little depressing for Michigan. This is a state-by-state variation. And I'm comparing total jobs in the latest available information versus what it was in March 2020, right before COVID. So Michigan is showing minus 1.4. So what does that mean? 1.4% fewer jobs in the state of Michigan now versus pre-COVID. Then you see other states like Texas is plus 4.9, many more jobs today. Florida, right before hurricane, plus 5.0. So the blue color states have more jobs, while the orange, red color states have fewer jobs. So Michigan, unfortunately, you are in that fewer job category. There is some reasoning as to why. States that reopened their economy sooner, like Georgia, Florida, they have more jobs. But states that had longer lockdown or stricter reopening conditions are lagging behind. And in Michigan, the governor imposed a very strict lockdown for a longer period, so you cannot really get going until a little later. Same thing in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania had a very strict lockdown. Our realtors in Pennsylvania, they became so angry. It's been 3 months since the lockdown, and we cannot do open houses. Now, fortunately, in Michigan, you could still do open houses, but in Pennsylvania, they cannot. So Pennsylvania realtors were just angry at the governor for not allowing them to do their business and generate some income for them, their family. So you see some variation. New York had a hard lockdown, so the New York is down minus 2.2. And then there's one other variation. Any state that produces oil are down. So Alaska is down. Wyoming is down. North Dakota is down. Louisiana is down. Texas is an exception. Their economy is so well diversified, they're no longer dependent on oil. But if you're an oil producing state, you are down because you are not drilling. So because America is not drilling as much, you are filling at the gas pump. Gas prices are high. That's why America is saying to Saudi Arabia, please produce more oil, because America evidently is not producing enough oil. And at the gas pump is certainly a painful situation. So we have to understand some of the balance. Electric cars, I hope we produce more, but at the same time, 90% of the energy is carbon-based, and we cannot simply shut off the carbon-based oil production without thinking that it would be free lunch, because pain is occurring at the gas pump, and the pain is occurring in Alaska and North Dakota in terms of having fewer jobs. So what is the right balance to go with it? Green energy, climate change, we certainly should always be concerned and monitor, but we have to see what the right balance is. Now, if we look at the job condition in Grand Traverse County, maybe some of the people in the audience are from nearby counties, but it will be very similar. And what you see here is first, seasonality, more jobs in the summer compared to winter. And the second is much steadier condition, very steady. So for overall, over the past 20 years, it looks like 10,000 more jobs. So year 2000, 40,000 people had a job. Today, 50,000 people have jobs. This is for the whole state of the Michigan. And this is quite depressing because we talk about the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, but Michigan, it looks like, went through a Great Depression for 10 straight years, from year 2000 to 2010, continuous job losses, especially as the auto industry needed to restructure to continuous job losses for 10 straight years. Then from 2010, trying to recover, so there's really not that many jobs compared to year 2000, only trying to recover. Then COVID hit, went down, and now trying to recover out of COVID, but not there yet in Michigan. Office vacancy rates across some big cities is like this. So the first one is Salt Lake City has higher vacancy rate, but still reasonable 8%. New York is seeing large increase. Had high vacancy. Washington, similar to Chicago. San Francisco, big change. They had a very low vacancy rate before COVID, but look how high it is today. Houston, for whatever reason, they always have high vacancy rate because they keep constructing new office building, so they always have high vacancy rate. Why do I show this to people in Upper Michigan? And the reason why I'm showing you is this work from home phenomena. I think we're at the very early innings. Just consider someone who grew up in Michigan, they have a job in San Francisco, but now they don't have to return back to work. They said, I have a terrific memory about Michigan. Maybe I want to go back to Michigan and buy a mansion rather than having a small townhouse in San Francisco. So this trend of office market not returning to normal may be benefiting your area. You are getting some of those remote workers to come to Michigan to work. So, this could be a good development for many resort destinations and many more affordable areas. Now, Traverse City is not affordable by Michigan standards. Only Oakland County or Ann Arbor would have similar price as in Traverse City. Other places in Michigan, much lower prices. But for people from New York or Washington or San Francisco, Traverse City is very affordable. So to the degree that they don't have to go back to office, they may say, why not have a property out in Michigan where I could work either permanently or even part-time basis, have a vacation properties where I can utilize more conditions. Ugly information from University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. This is not about Michigan, this is whole country, University of Michigan, this is the survey. How do you feel about the economy? There's various sets of questions they ask, and they form an index. And Americans are resoundingly saying the economy stinks. Maybe they are reminded at the gas station, they get frustrated at the grocery store, and now the mortgage rate being higher, retirement fund disappearing, Americans are not giving a good grade related to the economy. For our real estate people, realtors, I give this depressing figure. Very simple question from Fannie Mae. Is it a good time to buy? And the answer is no, according to consumers. Well, what I tried to illustrate on this graph is the middle of the graph. You see that little up, down, but essentially horizontal? That is in 2020 and 2021. What happened to the real estate market during that time? It boomed. But did the consumers express desire to buy more at that time? And answer is no. So what consumers say and what they actually do not necessarily have to match up. So it is possible if somehow interest rate retreats down, again, the resistance point and retreat back down somewhat, and then right property pops onto the market, new listing, they will strike at that opportunity. They want to have that chance. So just because the sentiment is down greatly does not mean that housing market automatically will be down, because what people say and what people do not necessarily match up. So I'm down to my final two slides. So this is one slide that I tell realtors to explain with potential clients, which is inflation is horrible, inflation is maddening, but is there any potential side benefit of inflation? And answer is the debtors generally benefit. Historically, people who had debt, when there was a certain surge of hyperinflation or whatnot, the debtors benefit because the amount they owe essentially became meaningless. So just using one illustration, $350,000 mortgage. So I guess you can say it's a little expensive property, $350,000 mortgage. At 7% mortgage rate of today, the monthly payment associated with it would be $2,329. Since most people are taking out a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, next year, same amount, next year, same amount. Then the middle column is monthly income. I'm using a household making about $80,000 a year. So 80,000 divided by 12 is 6,667. So monthly income at 6,667. But when there is an inflation, people's wage rate tends to rise. In fact, the actual data from the government is showing that wage rate today is 5% above 1 year ago. 5% increase in wages. Well, you go to grocery store, everything is 8% more expensive. So it's not an improvement in the standard of living, but still some increase in wages. Social Security check recipients. Next year, you will get 8.5% increase in your Social Security check because of cost of living adjustment. So when there is an inflation, people's income level also tend to rise. It does not mean improvement in standard of living, but just trying to catch up with inflation. So using that as an information, going to the middle column, the income, next year income is 7,000, then following income a little higher. So what's happening? Mortgage payment is the same, but income is rising. So the percentage devoted to mortgage payment as share of income is steadily declining. So who benefits if there's an inflation? Inflation is maddening, but the side benefit is people who have large debt. So mortgage is one major debt. So in a sense, if people buy a home and if there's a continuous high inflation, at least you have this table to say, well, maybe buying a home at 7% was not that bad at all. Maybe it's a good bargain. But let's do another scenario. Let's say inflation disappears in 2 years. What happens then? Well, if inflation disappears, mortgage rate will be much lower, maybe 5% mortgage rate. So you bought a home at 7%. In 2 years, what can you do? Refinance into the 5%. So if inflation is high, you have this table. But if the inflation rate goes down, people can always refinance. Part of the America the Beautiful system, it's not only about the great landscape, Michigan tourism, they do a great advertisement. Come to Michigan, a very attractive advertisement that you do. So you go look through America and you say, wow, so many beautiful places in America, but there are also certain systems like refinance possibility without heavy prepayment penalty. I know there is some refinance charge, but those are relatively minor, and certainly compared to other countries, and America refinancing is very active at fairly low cost. So low inflation, refinance, high inflation, you have this table. So my final slide, which is just a forecast for the housing market. So in hindsight, 2019, pre-COVID, uninteresting, boring, no increase in sales, prices increased by 4%. But 2020 became exciting for real estate. 2021 was even more exciting, but this year, 2022, is a transition. Once the December numbers are in, I think the unit sales will be down about 15%, but the prices are still elevated, certainly above 1 year ago. And next year, I think the sales will still come down somewhat because we have this high mortgage rate sticking around. I have a 7% mortgage rate. But the prices, my model is saying +1, which means that it could be -5 or +5. So it could go either way condition. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you all. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yoon. Connor is going to facilitate some questions.
Yeah, if there anybody that has any questions, I know we have a few minutes left. I'll run the mic around, get that to everybody. All right, here, right here in the back.
Yes, thank you. It was an excellent brief. I have a question. If you live in Traverse City, Michigan, and work remotely in San Francisco, where does the job count?
The job counts, I think in the payroll data, I believe it counts as in the San Francisco. And then there is another measurement of data, something called household employment. So when there is a monthly job report, they always mention the payroll data as the headline figure, but they also begin to discuss household jobs. And household jobs are where you ask not the company, you ask the individual to say, do you have a job? And so based on that, it will be in the Traverse City. So I think that would be the variation. I'm not 100% on it, but I think in terms of the economic impact, the fact that there is more remote possibility, even from people from Chicago able to come to Michigan and work, people from Detroit to say, well, I want to get away from the city and maybe go up to Upper Michigan. All that remote work possibility certainly will benefit more resort, desirable location like where you are.
Great. Are there more questions? Oh, right here.
Changing short-term rental regulations from a local regulatory environment to the state, wouldn't that increase prices and reduce inventory? And is that a good thing in our region?
Yeah, the short-term rental, so we had a realtor committee looking at the short-term rental issue. And there was a strong argument to say, let's push for more short-term rentals. And then there was a strong argument to say, no, we don't want short-term rentals, all those college people partying and they destroy the character of neighborhood. So there was a strong argument on both. And some localities say, yeah, we're going to pass legislation to permit more, while other localities say, no, we're going to pass legislation to prevent short-term rentals, Airbnb type of situation. So NAR said, we're going to stay out of this mess. So he said, local issue, let the locals determine what is the best directions to go.